champion Magnus Carlsen in New York on November 26th, and this is what happened. We're seeing that Sergey Karjakin is officially back to e4 and officially back to whatever it is, that mat strategy that him and his team prepared coming in. He played d4 once, but going back to the Lopez, despite whether people think he should vary and try something new, the theory that he's not getting that much with white, not phasing the Russian from following through with his game and mat strategy. Now, after a6 and then the move bishop to e7 here, we know that Magnus Carlsen is also ready to go back to the most commonly roads traveled in the Lopez as well. In game 9, of course, he played the move b5 in this position and then played bishop to c5. The Archangel variation, which kind of got him in a little bit of trouble and really proved probably not to be the best strategy, despite how it looked like the more fighting try than the normal Ruy Lopez. It kind of got the champ in some trouble immediately after having just lost game 8 with the white pieces. So Magnus says, I'm done with that. I'm going to stick to what I know best as well in the Lopez, which is just the most fundamentally and most well-known approach to this position. After the move d3, and then we get the position with d6, a3, castles, knight to c3. Something is becoming very clear here. Now, we've already broken down this position as far as talking about the principles of it. And I'm going to do that again here in just a second, show some of the common tactics that can help you in your games and some of the things that maybe could have occurred here. But before I do, I want to digress for a second and tell you that the approach that each player took in this game was very revealing as far as not only how they feel about the match, but also probably what their mindset was coming in and what their teams convinced them was their best strategy. What I mean by that is this. Karjakin, other than the throwaway anomaly d4 game, has stuck with the Lopez the whole time. And not only that, this position occurred in game 2, which means Karjakin is willing to repeat positions he's played before. And that's really telling as far as what his team thinks his best strategy is not to try to vary it and change things up despite what people think and try to get something different with white, but to actually try to improve on his games mid-match. Meaning the approach can be you come in with a whole set of weapons and you want to mix it up and try different things and see if you can get all your different preparation in. Or the approach can be I'm just going to stick to one thing, and that way when my opponent tries to repeat what they played at in a game earlier in the match, I'm going to have my team of seconds having cooked something up just in our hotel room lab just a few days ago, and I'm going to try to improve on my own play mid-match. It's a very, if I might say, very Soviet, very old school, very Russian approach to the match. Now, I think in really long matches, like we know from the Kasparov-Karpov years, right, 24 games, 48 games, I think it's even more effective, because if you stick to one thing, it meant that probably in the months heading up to the match, you really got to know those positions super well, and you're going to be stubborn and get it. But also your chances of improving upon earlier games in the match goes up with the more games there are. But in a shorter 12-game match, now we go to Magnus Carlsen's side of things and talk about how his team approached it here. And that became clear as soon as Magnus played bishop to e6, meaning Carlsen, for whatever reason, was not interested in playing the move 9, knight a5 here, and then bishop e6, and repeating what he did as black in game 2, despite being okay in that game. And I think it's because, one, his match strategy is, first of all, I don't want to deal with what Karjakin and his team of awesome Russian super GMs are coming up with and improving on our earlier games. I don't want to see what they would have done differently here than what he did in game 2. And 2, Carlsen's match strategy is I want to mix it up every time so that I'm constantly the one changing things first and constantly trying to put my opponent on his toes. And even though just the move bishop to e6 doesn't seem like it's that much different, and it's not, there are some clear tactical and strategical differences to not committing to this idea of putting your knight on the edge of the board and trying to win the bishop pair that way. So it's just interesting. We can draw parallels there, and I'm not trying to suggest that I think Magnus Carlsen's match approach is better because it's a shorter game match, meaning keep his opponent on his toes. There's less games for him to have, less opportunities for him to have a chance to improve on previous games. But if I had to choose one, and knowing what these players' styles are, I think I would understand why both players went with the approach they did, and why I think that probably for Carlsen, he feels like the opening stage as a whole has been a success for him in this match. And, the match is tied, and there's only a little bit of time left to find out if someone's going to win this in regulation. I'm not, not knowing what happened in this game, not telling you, and then we have game 12, regardless of what happened in this game. There's not much time left for us to even debate and talk about all these different angles and talk ourselves till we're blue in the face. But I think it is interesting, and I will say that I think that if you just think about it logically, having a whole bunch of things you can vary with or try to keep your opponent on their toes makes every game an individual game. And in a short match, it gives you the most chances to win that particular game, which being the better player coming in on paper, Carlsen feels like that's what he should do anyway. And Sergey Karjakin as well, it's a shorter match, but I need to stick with this so that I can try to improve on my play as I go and try to catch the world champion being a little lazy in the rest days or not preparing in his hotel rooms like my team is. So interesting, right? And I think that that's probably something we can draw a theory at and probably be right about what both teams are thinking about in terms of their approach in this match. Now, after bishop to e6, Karjakin played the move knight to d5. This move makes sense, and I just want to talk about the common tactical moves that maybe could have occurred here, because I know that most of my audience here is probably going to be wondering, well, first of all, what happens if takes? Taking on e6 is not a good idea for the same reason it wasn't a good idea for Carlsen to do it and open the f-file. It's just tactics that can only work out for black. And once you've opened the f-file, if you don't now change the center, and let's say you just make a passive developing move, well, black will play queen e8. They'll bring the queen out to one of these squares. The knight will get involved. The f-file's open, and probably black is going to be feeling good about their practical attacking chances. So you're not really interested in taking on e6, even if the position is kind of dynamically equal, because you're giving black a clear plan. The only reason you would ever take on e6 in these positions and create an opening to the king and some weaknesses is if you felt you could get access to exposing them. One way to do that is to try to open up the position and create these tactics here with knight takes d4. And after black takes it, maybe be in a position where white can try to get out these pawns. But once you see black's next move, which I believe the best move is probably knight to d7, it threatens bishop to f6. The knight may come into e5 and c4, maybe even c5 if the knight becomes vulnerable due to the bishop. And again, you just don't see white getting the kind of counterplay against the opened lines that you would want to justify bishop takes e6. So if you're wondering about that, that's why probably taking isn't a good idea. But what about the move d4 right away? Leave the tension of the bishops and try to go for a similar kind of idea, but leave the tension first and get my queen active. This actually runs into a very common Ruy Lopez trap for white that I want to show you here because it should help you play your own Lopez and any structure similar so you don't fall for it. Be careful when you're trying to visualize the tactics, not just here before you commit to the line, but visualize that position in your head after d4 and try to imagine the tactics that are coming once the queen is there. And the key is that this pawn will come to c5 with tempo, and then doesn't matter where the first lady goes, the pawn will go to c4, and whether black strikes with d5 and tries to really take advantage of this bishop being closed, or even plays another move here, this is a position that is good for black because the bishop has been locked out. And this tactic that occurred because of the tempo on d4 is really key and very common, and so therefore it's a pattern I wanted to take the time to show you because patterns repeat in life and in chess, and let's try to learn from them. So that's some of the tactics that could happen here, but it's why white's not going to play d4, and it's why Karjakin plays knight to d5. He's going to deal with the tension another way, not let you take and double my pawns, but try to deal with the center, not by opening it, maybe try to improve my minor pieces. There aren't really any good ways to take on d5, so Carlsen played what's pretty clearly the best move just to repeat the same tactical idea that Karjakin's going for. I'm going to put my knight in the center, once again renewing my idea of taking on b3, whether I'm taking with the bishop or the knight, and double your pawns. But also pointing out that I'm not really worried about you going for the bishop pair here, because one, this is going to be a closed position. Two, it's not a bishop pair you can really hold on to and get two bishops. Either you're going to take again, where I'd probably be happy to take with maybe the f-pawn and the knight, to maybe try to relocate my ponies into some dark squares. And either way, you're not going to be getting the bishop pair, so no point in doing that. Karjakin's still a little better here though, so if he can approach the tension here correctly, he's probably going to be just fine, at least equal. He took on d4, which I think is fine, but you're really trying to change the structure is if you can get f4 and try to use your big pawn chain. We always say pawn chains are like massive spears heading in a direction, and the rest of the pieces can follow suit. Swim with the river, I always tell my students. Don't go upstream. That's more exhausting, right? Swim with the flow of the position. So you only want to take on d4 if you can get f4. And that's what Karjakin goes for here, but he only does so after making further trades. And I wonder if he was doing it because he already didn't like the way the game was headed and was kind of looking to simplify and take pieces off the board, or if he didn't calculate enough into ideas of going immediately for the pawn. Moves like rook e1 are also possible, but it makes sense to be a little worried about playing f4, for the record, while there's still this tension here, because if the trade on d5 occurs, this seems a little more unnatural, right, to have the pawn on f4 when the bishop is blocked. This bishop is blocked by its own pawn. Maybe the e-file looks a little weird. So I understand not playing f4. But it also is a sign that white's probably not getting a lot out of this trade then, because if you can't justify this pawn chain or expose the double pawn, then black is happy with this because he has a pawn that's further advanced in the center, and it's the launching of his natural play going in the direction of his river, which will be on the queen side. So after knight takes and takes, Karjakin did decide to trade before taking once again, and then following through with the idea we've talked about with f4. Makes more sense to get it now. The e-file isn't open, right? The bishop on b3 isn't eating granite with its own pawn. But also, there's not a lot going on in this position. This moment here is really where we got our first official novelty, although I think the players have been on their own here for a little bit, because novelty or not, this position hasn't been played at the high levels very much. But after the move c5, Carlsen was playing the move that had never been played before. The only game in this line previous was this idea e5. But it makes sense, I think, not to play e5. One, why invite the pawn chain to get any further, even if you're not that worried about the attack? Two, it closes in your own bishop. Why create this solid decision in the center rather than try to build on the tension if you don't have to? So I think c5 is the move that's the most logical. This is very much like not the kind of e4 game you would expect, right? It's like a closed Sicilian almost. Black is trying to get play on the queen side. White has this king side pawn structure, which isn't something you see every day. That's why I make that close Sicilian reference, even though probably the c5 would be open in most of those. But it looks like that kind of pawn structure. White's going to be playing on the king side. Black's going to be playing on the queen side. White plays queen to g4. Black has to defend the pawn. White goes forward with his plan. Nothing is more logical than that. And now, rather than close up the position and let white try to find, if the position's totally closed, it's a get-out-of-jail-free card to bring your pieces aggressively to that side of the board. If you want to talk about swimming with the river, this is more like some sort of water-bending tribe. Hashtag Avatar Last Airbender reference you didn't see coming. After rook f3, white's going to play rook h3, try to create some attacking chances. I don't think black is really that much worse here. Black can play rook ac8, play c4. I don't have it to sit here and calculate the race of who would win. I think the position's probably dynamically equal, but still probably just a position that makes it more clear what both sides want to do. And Carlsen wasn't interested in that. He wants dynamic optimism, meaning he wants to create opportunities for the game to go wrong because he feels like he's not going to go wrong and his opponent might. He doesn't want to make it that clear. So he plays rook e8 and builds on the tension. Bishop d2 is played, which is a move that completes white's development. I don't think there's much more to say besides it's logical to do that. Still, you have the chances of all your pieces coming to the king side. Also, bishop d2 is sort of a defensive-minded move in some ways, because if c4 comes too early in some of these positions, it happens now, but let's say if everybody gets traded quickly, and maybe this is even a line that Carlsen didn't want Karjakin to go for, but if something like this happened, the bishop on d2 is justified in a lot of positions because it goes to b4 and then kind of sits tight, right? And hits d6. Maybe white can get a4. I'm actually a little surprised Karjakin didn't go for this, because even though it's an endgame and he just had a bad experience with their last long endgame, a bad taste in his mouth from the game before, I think this is an endgame where the roles are reversed. I think Karjakin's probably the only one who can win this position as white. I don't see a lot happening for black here. Maybe Carlsen would play rook d8 and try to undouble the pawns. Most likely result, certainly a draw. But I'm not afraid to play this position as white at all in the endgame. Hard to lose. So I'm surprised Karjakin didn't simplify in that way. Instead, he played the move h3, which led us to our first truly critical moment. There's several ways this position can go. Again, e5 can be played. And even after h3, I wonder if e5 isn't best, because now you're really not as worried about these straightforward attacking ideas. Carlsen didn't play e5. Again, he wanted more tactics than that. But I wouldn't be surprised if e5 is actually the best way to play the position. Black is in no danger of these double pawns sticking forever. He can play d5 at some point. With the position closed, he can probably switch back to the c-file. So I look at this and wonder why Carlsen didn't see this as having some long-term chances. Maybe he just felt like if bishop g5 comes and everybody gets traded, we're just in an equal major piece ending. But that was a possibility. Carlsen wasn't interested in that, and instead, after h3, he calculated some tactics that in the press conference, if you follow Chess Center, the show we do at 5 p.m. Pacific every day after the game. If you haven't been watching it, that's a you problem. It's on chess.com TV. Carlsen said he felt like he had the chance to get the initiative here, and even though he was sure there were probably some different ways Karjakin could deal with it, he wanted to create opportunities for his opponent to go wrong. And that's what he did, starting with the move c3. He doesn't try to simplify the tension by trading or play e5. He creates tactics. And after b takes, plays the first really surprising move of the game, d5, exclam. Maybe he could have taken on c3 and then played d5. We might have gotten to similar positions, but let me highlight for you some of the tactics that are going on here. The key is black is sacrificing a pawn, but if white takes here, black instantly wins material. If white takes here, black has this really nice trick where he takes on f5, and he's also probably going to win material here if white just goes straight forward without thinking. Moves like queen takes f5 get in big trouble after takes and d takes c3, a double attack on the bishop, and threats like bishop to d4 check, winning the undefended rook. White has 99 problems, and an exposed king is one of them. So that's not exactly what Karjakin would have wanted. Taking on e6 is probably one of the ways that the game actually could have gone. I wonder if Carlsen might have considered rook takes to keep pieces on the board, but tactically, I think that taking here and then dealing with these straightforward lines like e takes d5 by putting a rook on the second rank is probably a position that now leads to the two-result kind of game that Carlsen wants. As I said, he has a spoiled chess style. He wants to play positions that only he can win, and he's good at it. But this would have been, like, if white has to play rook f2, takes c3, maybe bishop g5 check is also an option, but I think take c3 makes sense. Okay, the computers may evaluate this as roughly equal, but it seems awkward and hard for white. There's discovered checks coming. The d-pawn is falling. Moves like bishop e3 would lose on the spot because now bishop g5 check comes, and then king e2 is met by rook e8. Hashtag resigns if you're white. So if a move like bishop e1 is forced, I don't know. The evaluation is better for black, but I think that black is feeling like he's pushing in this position and has somewhat of an initiative once the d-pawn is gobbled back up. So Carlsen creating tension, kind of creating his opportunities tactically. Karjakin calculated well here, decided he didn't want to go for any of these pawn trades, and decided he was going to eliminate the tactics by playing a move like bishop g5 and just force the pieces off the board. Carlsen wasn't that upset with this, I think, because with the trades happening, his pawn sacrifice was clearly justified. And once he played the move e3, it's clear he's saying, okay, I know this position's probably a draw, but I'm going to try to push for a win a little longer and see if you go wrong. Just wait. Here's the thing. E takes d3 would have been the move played by a man just looking for a draw. C takes d3, queen e3 check. Even though you're down a pawn here, this is just, I mean, we might as well just, call a day and go get a drink, if you know what I'm saying, right? This is just a draw. The position is equal. It's a rook ending. Let's not hold our breath for anything more exciting to happen in this game. So what I wanted to point out is that e3 is played not because Carlsen really thinks the position is winning, but I think he thinks he can win it. And that's a little bit of a shifting of the guard. I mean, I criticized him openly in Game 7 when I thought he was better as black and really had this non-Carlsen way of doing things where he said, oh, I'm going to do match strategy and try to get a draw as black. Well, guess what happened in Game 8 as white? He lost, right? Didn't seem like the way Carlsen plays. Carlsen just plays in the moment. He has this Buddhist Zen. I don't care if I think I should play for a draw here. I'm going to try to play the best move here and create opportunities for my opponent to go wrong. And I think that that's what you should be doing regardless of the color you have. You have to play the best moves. Doesn't matter if you're white or black. So this is an interesting sign. And I don't know. I think that with only one game remaining, there's not a lot of time for the better player, the higher rated player, Magnus Carlsen, to win the match if he doesn't do it here. Right? So with only one game after this, he's thinking, I might as well try to go a little bit further. Rook e1 was played, h6 comes with tempo, and then the move e2, inviting white to maybe step into the fray and create some tactical opportunities. After the move queen f3, though, which is the best according to the engine, a5 is played. King f2 is simply not possible. Do not blunder into rook f8 if you're looking for what's good for you, right? We have this a family-friendly show here, so let's keep things safe. We don't want to blunder into losing our first lady. But even after c3, Carlsen doesn't seem to have enough to just try to force the e-pawn through. Rook f8 doesn't work, obviously, unless the king is there, because then queen can take the pawn. So Carlsen played queen a2, which actually creates a lot of chances here. It's tricky if you're white. You still would like to play king f2, but there's still rook f8. If you just sit, is this queen coming to d2? Am I going to start having threats of dealing with the rook and the pawn? But the problem really for black is that even if you go full on tilt and you find a way for that e-pawn to become a real reality of a factor, you probably can't do so without your light squares and the potential checks that will occur as soon as your queen leaves this diagonal becoming a source of counterplay. And that's actually what happened here. The queen came into c6, and after rook e6 and king h7, Carlsen realized, well, Now the rook is under fire, and probably she's been excommunicated from her homeland enough that this king will get into a perpetual check if I don't do something forcing. So Carlsen plays the move queen d2. We get the trade we talked about, but after queen f2, queen e4 check comes, and the players simply threw in the towel, as there's no real way for black to escape perpetual checks without probably losing in the process. I don't even think black could lose in the process. There's just nowhere to go. G6, the queen comes to e7, and we'll have a perpetual. If you go back to h8, clearly the queen goes here, and we have a perpetual. And if you go to g8, I can check anywhere here, because the only way to get out of the perpetual would be to give up your e-pawn, which is probably not your favorite thing to do in this position. So on that note, no more spoilers, no more me trying to keep the result from you secret and in the dark as you learn things from this game. You know how I love doing that. You now know that game 11 was drawn, which means we are moving into the final game of regulation anyway of this World Chess Championship match with a score of 5.5 games apiece. Magnus Carlsen will get white in the last game. So make sure that you have your Monday cleared. Forget Monday Night Football. You'll be joining me at 5 p.m. Pacific on chess.com TV. Come on, you know you will. We'll be breaking down whatever happens in Game 12. Will we be having a new world champion? Karjakin wins with black. Will Magnus Carlsen win with white and avoid tiebreaks? Or will the game end in a draw, and will we be headed to rapid playoffs starting on Tuesday? Nobody knows yet. That's why they call it showbiz, because what we do is try to get you hyped and excited to stay tuned and to pay close attention to what happens with these players as they move into the final game of the 2016 World Chess Championship match. Thanks for tuning in to my video analysis here.